we heard about Tom Bowman when we were over at the Pentagon. Here he is. As was described, very few reporters know more about the Pentagon and the art of making difficult reporting more accessible than Tom at National Public Radio. During his nearly 20 years at NPR, Tom has traveled the world to Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and often for months at a time. But his work here in DC and domestically is impressive, as he's one of the best at penetrating formidable bureaucracies, as we walked into today, to find stories that nobody else finds and nobody else is able to report like Tom. Before landing at NPR, he spent nearly 2 decades at the Baltimore Sun, covered the Pentagon there as well, the Maryland State House, Congress, the U.S. Naval Academy, and the National Security Agency, where his reporting on racial and gender discrimination at the secretive NSA led to a 1994 government investigation. Tom is a co-winner of the Headliners Award, National Headliners Award, for his reports on the lack of advanced tourniquets for U.S. troops in Iraq. And in 2010, his coverage of the Taliban attack on an Army unit won an Edward R. Murrow Award. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
That was very kind, maybe too kind, but at any rate, yeah, I've been at NPR for quite some time, and been in Washington. I worked at the Baltimore Sun, but spent most of my time in Washington, a little bit in Annapolis. So I guess we're here to talk about Washington coverage and how you do it. This is the easiest place in the country to be a reporter. You go to a hearing, you go to a speech, you write it up, right? You talk to Bernie Sanders, you talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you put together a story. It's not good enough. What's really going on, right? That's the challenge. Oops. That's the challenge we all have. What's really going on? Because this isn't a real city. This is a theme park, and people will tell you what they want you to hear. And again, you can be a reporter and just be a stenographer, and that's not what we do. And the only way you find out what's going on is you build as many sources as possible, build a network of sources. You can never have enough sources. And we're so interested in talking with Congressman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, and that's good, you have to get their quote, but you really want to talk to their staffs, you want to talk to the people who work for them. Because oftentimes those people know more than the lawmaker. So the lawmakers spread thin. I'm meeting with a Girl Scout troop today, with the Chamber of Commerce from Topeka tomorrow, this and that, and they may be, if you look at their bios, they may be neophytes, right? Used to be a mayor of some place, and now they're in Congress. Now the staffs, some of the staffs have been there 30, 40 years. They know what's going on. Get to know their staffs. Go through their public affairs people first and say, I want to talk with, whatever your issue is. If the guy's on armed services, I want to talk to his aide on armed services. Go have coffee or a beer with that person, right? Everyone I know drinks coffee or beer. And if they don't, I don't want to talk to them anyway, right? But that's the only way, is to build a network of sources. Again, you can do it the easy way, just cover a speech. That's not good enough. Also remember, if you're covering politics or any issue, any kind of beat, who are the people, and then who are their mentors? Who do they learn from, right? Kevin McCarthy, who was Speaker, his mentor was Bill Thomas, Congressman from California, who actually ripped him apart in a New Yorker piece. If you ever read it, it's awful. But that guy knows who McCarthy is. He knows what he's thinking, he knows what he's all about. But every place you go, someone has a mentor. Find that person. That is key. And here we were in Washington. This is the capital of the United States, right? How many embassies are here? If you do any foreign policy stuff, State Department doesn't want to talk. Could be Ukraine, it could be Gaza, right? Go to the embassies. They love to talk, right? If you're doing something in Ukraine, well, who else is involved here? The Brits? Poland? Who really wants to see more aid for Ukraine? And are worried about it, right? Baltic states, reach out to them, say, can I talk with someone? Can I talk to your attaché? Ukrainian embassy, right? I don't think enough people go to the Ukrainian embassy to talk to those folks. They're desperate to get that money, right? Talk to them. And again, the bottom line is you'll never understand what goes on here unless you get that web of sources. You should be working it every single day. You know, committee staff, retired people, retired military people. I just got off the phone before I came here talking to a retired military person. They're, you know, what's Iran going to do? Right? You kill their guys in Damascus. What are they going to do? And everyone assumes it's going to be the proxies. It's going to be Hezbollah shooting stuff into Israel. It's going to be the Houthis again. Maybe hit some U.S. in Syria or Iraq. So I just got off the phone. I assume that, right? And I'm telling all our guys, don't worry about it. It's going to be the proxies. It's going to be the same old thing. I got off the phone with this guy 20 minutes ago. And he said, I think it's going to be worse. I'm like, really? And he said, Iran is putting all its ballistic missiles on standby, ready to go, and activating their radar. And now this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm like, oh my God. Huh? I already told our bosses, so yeah. And he said the last time they did that was when Soleimani was killed. And they fired ballistic missiles at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq and wounded some American service members. So, and he said it could happen like 5 or 6 tonight or tomorrow night. So, we'll see. But that's why you cultivate these people, you talk with them. And the great thing about retired people like that, they're not in the game anymore, but they want to be in the game. It's like a retired, soccer player, retired baseball player. It's like, if I were managing the Orioles, this is what I would do, or the Red Sox. I can't believe they're doing this or that or the other thing. They're itching to get back in the game. They love to talk once they're gone, right? And frankly, and again, when you reach out to these staffers, when you reach out to the retired community, some have no interest in talking with you. Just keep going, try someone else. Keep going and going until you find someone that'll talk. And once you do find that person, they're worth their weight in gold. Because you can basically say, hey, I'm hearing this is going on with the border. The person's on Homeland Security. Is this what the administration's thinking about? No, you have it half right. They're not thinking about that, but they are thinking about this. And let's just talk on background, but this is what they're telling us. They have to tell the Hill. A lot of times they don't want to tell the Hill because they know the Hill will just leak it to everybody. But God help any administration, if you don't tell the Hill before you tell reporters, they're going to be pissed. They sign the checks, right? So if you can't get someone at the Pentagon, you can't get someone at State Department, go to the committees, right? And also I know a lot of the people here, Rachel, we're at NPR, we have 800 stations. One of the great things, and I know some of you people work for newspaper groups or TV groups, you also want to work back home with people. And I keep telling our people, I don't think we do it enough, is pair your stories together. There's a policy decision coming out of the Biden administration or Congress that affects the border, right? Okay, mildly interesting, maybe very interesting. But you also want to talk to real people back home. How does it affect you? It could be increase in the minimum wage, it could be any issue. But what makes a story even more compelling is when you talk to real people, not people here all the time. Because it just it's not that interesting. Real people are interesting. So I'll leave it there.
Hi, my name is Aneri. I'm with KFF Health News. Because you talked so much about the importance of sourcing, I have sort of maybe a granular question, but the advice we've heard several times from speakers here, and I've heard before, is to reach out to your sources when you don't need something from them. Like, be in touch even when you don't have a question for a story or something like that, to kind of keep that relationship alive.
Amen. I call it checking the traps.
And so what
That you basically, hey, how you doing? I know your daughter had a graduation. How did it go?
Okay. This
Or
is
let's-
exactly my question. Like, what do you say?
Anything. Well, one of the great things about sitting down and talking to people face to face, and the hell with Zoom, is you connect with them if you've never met them before. Where you're from, where'd you go to school? Do you like, baseball? Are you a skier? Do you like hiking? Do you travel? And you talk to anybody for 5 minutes, especially in our line of work, you're going to find some connection that you can just use, Oh, wow, you've been to skiing in Switzerland? Oh, I have a friend who lives in Zermatt. I was there. You have to go there. It's awesome, right? Anything you can do. I once talked to a DIA guy, and he said, we're in the same line of work. I said, what do you mean? I'm a reporter. You're a spy. He said, no. We seduce people. And then the general term, seduce people. We get people to tell us things maybe they shouldn't. He said, I do it to get people to betray their country. You do it to find out what's going on and why. I said, I never thought of it that way. That's really cool, But he's right.
And how often do you do it?
Not enough. I got to do it more. But there's always, news. I tell people we're like a short order cook, The grill's going, and you got all this stuff going. It's like, oh my God, Gaza. I thought it was a back burner. Now it's a front burner. We got to deal with that. Anything could happen, I could get in my car and there's a message. Someone's getting fired, or Lloyd Austin is in the hospital again. It could be anything. It could be a million things. We're doing the grill,
Going off that, I have another granular question. Like, I feel like a lot of people our age, you almost have to email or text them to find a time before calling them. So how often do you cold call people? And then how much of your day do you spend on the phone with these sources?
I prefer to do it face to face, but this person I talk with, he's out of state, so I called just to kind of check with them, because this is what I'm hearing. Does this sound right? So this is where the sources come in. And I was watching CNN before he came over, and the CNN thing is it's likely proxies. Now that could be the case, but this guy knows his stuff. Right, when he tells me something, I'm like, shit, wow, I didn't know that. So again, you always want to keep reaching out, talking, and
So you're usually scheduling meetings with them?
No, usually I just call out of the blue, send a message, and then talk. If they're in town, again, I prefer to sit down and talk, especially if it's someone new and you want to solidify that relationship. I think sitting down is really important.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Michaela with Bloomberg. I also don't drink coffee or beer, so I apologize.
Sparkling water.
Yeah. But just as an outsider to the Pentagon, it just seems so intimidating to cover just national security issues, especially pressing ones. How did you get over that, if you experienced it at all?
Oh, I did, definitely. So I started covering the Naval Academy and kind of had a sense of how the military works, or at least the Navy, But yeah, it's intimidating when you go to the Pentagon at first and you're in the briefing room. It's like, oh my God, I'm in the briefing room of the Pentagon. That's Jim Miklaszewski. That's David Martin. Jesus, they've been here for 30 years. What the hell am I doing here, right? And then the acronyms fly all around. It's like, I have no idea what these people are talking about. Or you go to these breakfasts and people from Tony Capaccio will start throwing out these budget things and this, that, and these widgets. And I'm like, I'm completely lost. It does take a while. You read, you talk to people, you ask stupid questions. What was that acronym? And most of the time people, they're fine with it. It's like, we know you're new to the beat and this is what that thing is. Then why do I care about it, right? I just had one like 2 weeks ago, they're talking about this thing called Replicator. Does anybody know what Replicator is? It's a new drone program. I never even heard of it. And I'm in this off the record with this senior officer. And I'm looking around, and I didn't want to ask because I sound like an idiot. But I'm like, the hell's Replicator? So I think I asked Tony, it works at Bloomberg. And he said, it's this new program they're announcing. Because he knows everything about the widgets and everything else. So he said, no, it's this drone. They want to build like thousands of drones and just send them against an adversary. But there's always something, even I don't know, that I'm learning every day. So it takes a while. Any beat takes a while. Anything you cover, it could be farm issues, right? It could be the environment. It's a huge learning curve. And you just read as much as you can, talk to as many people as you can. And but it takes a while. You got to be patient.
Do you experience any like mental or emotional toll when especially covering something like the conflict in the Middle East?
No, but we did have an incident when I was in Afghanistan. We lost our photographer and interpreter. We were in an ambush and they were killed. So that was obviously bad. I'm glad we stayed there and didn't come home right away just to decompress, but that was bad. But the day-to-day stuff, no. I mean, I feel bad, you're looking, especially the Gaza thing, what happened to the Israelis and what's happening to the Palestinians. You look at these pictures and you're listening to these people talk about their families. It's just horrific, But does it have a mental toll? I don't think so.
Hi,
Hi.
Nancy Vu with the Washington Examiner. I think my question touches on or can be applied to a number of beats, but how do you differentiate between what's a rumor and what's actually true, especially considering your beat has, very serious national security implications?
Well, again, this gets back to the sources. You have to have good sources and say, hey, I'm hearing this, or data miner is putting this out. Because our editors, they're insatiable. It's just like, I'm hearing this, and like pinging you all day long. We have a newscast, right? I'm sorry, they have to be fed 24/7. I understand, but also it's like, that's not a story. I'll run it down for you, but I can't spend my entire day chasing these little things that go on. And with social media, with everything, I just got one from a guy in the Middle East. He said someone on Twitter is saying there's a U.S. Army ship off Israel ready to shoot down missiles. And I'm like, first of all, that's not an Army ship, it's a Navy ship. The Army does have ships to move stuff, cargo and everything from point A to point B. So the whole thing was ridiculous. And I'm like, this person's a knucklehead. Don't know what they're talking about. What you should know is the Navy has ships off Israel with the ability to shoot down incoming missiles. That's all you have to know. But the Army is building this fake pier off Gaza. Maybe that's what this knucklehead on Twitter is talking about, but it just makes no sense. But again, I don't tell you, it's the social media thing. It's just, you're spending half your day just knocking things down. It's hard.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Great to hear from you. I could pepper you with questions, but one to just follow up on that point is, how do you sort of juggle the urgent news of the day, trying to confirm something that's about to happen or make sense of something that just happened versus your longer term projects and pitches and source building? How do you sort of decide what rises to the top? Maybe sometimes it's coming from other people asking for, but how do you think about prioritizing the stories that you're working on in any given day?
Well, for the long time it's been Gaza, for at least 6 months. So that's kind of a priority. And particularly today, if Iran does something, what does it look like? How does the U.S. respond? What are they seeing? I'm going to call this guy, just called today. I said, I'll probably be talking with you maybe in the next 48 hours. Just give me a call anytime. So that clearly is number one. It looks like they're going to do something. They could be proxies Iran. So I'll have to do some cleanup on that. I'm also trying to do another podcast. Can't believe I'm saying it. I did one last year. It took 2 years to put together. I swore I'd never do it again, but I'm going to maybe try to do another one And then, you go to the briefings, you talk to people. Ukraine aid is going to be a huge thing. I just sat down with Joanna Kakissis, our correspondent in Ukraine. She's here for a little bit. Just where's this thing going militarily? Conscription in Ukraine, how many people are they going to need? Can they get them? And I said, one of the stories we should do, how many Ukrainians are now in Berlin? That I'm not going back home and going to the front lines. I said, all we have to do, and radio is great about this, right? You go to a bar, where do the Ukrainians hang out, right? Go to a bar, put a beer on your expense account and talk to a bunch of Ukrainians. Why don't you, of course they're going to say, I don't want to go home. It's a great little story for us. But I said, you could pair that with one of our reporters in Europe with your story about this is where it gets into the policy thing. I'm doing a policy story, you're doing the story that people are really going to be interested in. I'm talking to this kid who's 22, lost his brother, is now in Berlin, and I'm not going to the front lines. My mother would be devastated. She told me to leave. It's a great story. People are great stories. Policy is somewhat interesting. It's not great.
Hi, Mike Maselli with the AP. My question for you is when you're, talking about real people matter, these real voices are the ones that really tell the story. When it comes to military stories, how are you going about finding those human voices, the people who are affected, not just the people who are affected by what's happening with the military, but maybe even the troops themselves?
Well, it was easier when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan because you could actually go places with them, go on patrols with them, and how do you think the Afghans are doing with training and so forth? And you can go back home and talk to their families. This is my husband's 4th deployment. So those are the people stories you can do. And then if there's, let's say there's a military pay increase or whatever, you can go any place around here, like Fort Belvoir, some of these other locations. And the challenge is if you're active duty, a lot of times they'll say, you have to go talk to public affairs, I don't want to talk. But a lot of times soldiers and Marines, they will talk. And they're easy to pick out. You go to let's say you're at Camp Lejeune and you go to the muffler shop down the road and you see this guy with a high and tight, probably a Marine, right? So that's a way you can do it. Around here, it's a little more difficult. Because you don't have big bases where you can go to a subway or a bar or something and talk to a bunch of soldiers. It's a little more difficult around here. But there are all sorts of groups as well. Iraq and Afghan Veterans of America, they're very helpful. They can put you in touch with veterans. And they're happy to do it because they're very plugged in on policy. And there are various, all sorts of veterans groups, you can, VFW and so forth, you can talk with. There are a lot of veterans now helping out the Afghans who are here, trying to get them housing. Those are really good stories. I did a couple of stories on that with local Afghans. Northern Virginia is a huge Afghan population, so those are easy to get. So veterans are probably easier to talk with than active, because a lot of times you will get that whole, sir, I can't talk, I'm told you have to talk to public affairs, that kind of thing. But there are plenty of places you can go to at least talk to veterans. Or, again, go to the subway shop, Meineke Muffler, at a base, and you can pick these guys out a mile away. And oftentimes they'll say, hey, I don't want to talk. But this guy's spouse may say, no, I want to talk. He hasn't had a pay raise in 5 years, or we're having trouble with TRICARE, health system, and they're eager to talk. There was a woman, remember when Tuberville put the hold on everybody? She was out there talking all the time. She talked with us several times, this woman. She was down around Norfolk, I think. Husband was a Navy commander, and there's no way that guy's going to talk. But his wife was out there 24/7. She was awesome on the radio, really good. Mm-hmm.
Hello, hi. I'm Gabby. I'm with the Nevada Independent. I always am curious, people who cover agencies, when there's changes of administration, how, especially with something like DOD, which is such a big civilian population or non-political, what are the biggest differences, like in that first few months or year when an administration changes in terms of like feeling out the new people, getting to know the style of different defense secretaries and the people they bring in and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, if you cover a beat for a long time, you kind of know who the people are they're bringing in because you may have known them years ago. They may have retired from the military and they're being brought in as a top aide. So that's always kind of fun to see who's coming, who's leaving. In a bureaucracy, there's that level where they're not going anywhere. They're just there forever, right? Until Trump comes in. Apparently he wants to get rid of 40,000 of these folks within the federal government. But generally, a lot of people stay. They don't go anywhere. But it can be kind of refreshing if you cover a beat, let's say the Pentagon, and a new person comes in, because again, you may know a lot of these people, or it's a fresh start for anybody. Like the previous person really wasn't interested in talking to the press, but this person is. So that's always kind of nice to see, And again, the old reach out to them, hey, I cover this beat. I'd like to sit down with you, grab lunch or something. That's invaluable. And again, the face-to-face thing I think is really important, because once you make a connection with someone, unless they're a complete jerk, it generally works out. Once they see you, there's a face to the name on radio or print or TV, then, I think generally, if you're somewhat, the reason we're in this is because it's interesting as hell. It's a lot of fun. It beats working for a living. So we're always interested in what the issues are, what people are saying. And I think also a lot of people in government, they're interested in talking to reporters, Some aren't, but a lot are, because they think it's cool what we do. And I couldn't agree more. It is cool what we do. It's a lot of fun. And they'd like to talk to reporters. Along those lines, so I'm trying to do a podcast on January 6th. I was up there. I covered that whole thing. So I'm in touch with some active Marines that were in the Capitol. So I'm trying to do a story on that. And one of them is that he was facing trial just last week, U.S. District Court in D.C. And I sat there for a while watching the hearing and everything. And then just last Friday, a week ago, I went back because I thought it was going to be the last day of the trial. And I got there at like 3 o'clock. They usually wrap up like 4:30 or so. And the door to the courtroom was locked, but the guy's name was still up there, the case. So I'm like, damn, maybe they took a break. So I went back to the judge's chambers. They buzzed me in. And I said, what's going on? She said, we did closing arguments 2 hours ago. I'm like, damn. I said, well, when's the judge going to make a verdict? And they said, well, come on back. And I thought I'd be talking with the clerk. She leads me into the judge's chambers. And he stands up and says, Mr. Bowman, honored to meet you. And I'm like, oh my God. And I cover the military and I used to do politics. I'd never even sat down with a federal judge. We talked for an hour. We talked for an hour about this case, January 6th, what the hell's going on with the country, Trump. It was fascinating. All off the record, but really interesting as hell. And here's a guy who likes reporters. He knows people at NPR, and I mean, he was great. Again, you have to get out there and talk to people. But that was just like, that threw me, I got to tell you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Erin. I work at Axios. You've obviously covered a lot of really incredible things. I'm just kind of curious, what story are you most proud of that you've worked on? Can you sort of walk us through what, the process for what the story was?
Well, it's mostly military stories. We did a series of stories on this Marine unit that had the highest casualty rate in Afghanistan. That was 7 years ago or so. A whole series of stories. We talked to some of the guys wounded. We talked to the families of those who were killed. That was absolutely fascinating. And then I just did a podcast that ran last year called Taking Cover, about a friendly fire unit. A friendly fire incident in Fallujah, Iraq, back in 2004. And the first series of stories, I was told this unit had a really bad, they had 22 double amputees. They had 25 dead, and then 100 wounded in this unit of 600 to 800. So I heard about that from people at the Pentagon. I said, I got to reach out to the survivors and the families, and it was absolutely fascinating. And my talent was just shutting up and listening, because a lot of times we don't listen enough, starting with me, because you always want to like ask a question or so. Just sitting there and keeping your mouth shut, and the stories were just incredible. And the same with this one we did on the friendly fire incident. So I got the first one from just talking to people and saying, I got to reach out, that's a hell of a story. And the second one, I got a tip at a whiskey bar in DC. I was talking to this retired guy, and it wasn't, he didn't like say, we got to sit down and talk about this. We talk about all sorts of things. And then he told me about this friendly fire incident that happened in 2004. And he said they covered it up. I said, really? He said they covered it up because the son of a congressman was involved. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. I mean, this was like 3 years ago. I said, someone would have done this story by then. That can't be right. And he said, no, it's right. It was Duncan Hunter Jr. If you're from California, you know who he is. He was a young lieutenant at the time. His dad was chairman of the Armed Services Committee. And it was one of those stories, as we say in our business, it's almost too good to check, because it's just like, that can't be right. It was right. And no one ever did anything on it before. And now I'm still stunned that no one did anything on this. But that's how that came about. And that's like a 1 in a million, you know. But again, sources, talking to people, getting out of your office, right?
Thank you. Kwesi from PolitiFact. I have two questions. Have you had a situation where a source gave you some information that didn't turn out to be true, especially if they're using off the record, or if you're using an anonymous source and it just turned out not to be true?
I'm sure it's happened. I think sometimes they don't have all, it's not they're doing it to stick it to you. It's a lot of times they don't have enough information. So that's why you need multiple sources. I mean, that's really key. If someone tells you something, especially depending how explosive it is, you really got to just run it down. But there are times when someone is actually in the know, right? Let's say a congressman talks to Zelensky, right? Or talks to Netanyahu. I mean, that's pretty damn good. But if it's a staffer or someone, I heard this, I think this is right, you really got to, you always have to run it down.
And also, how do you sort of like keep up with all the other aspects? Because even though you're covering the military, you also have to know foreign policy, you also have to know domestic politics and all these other things that sort of like interact. How do you try to keep
Just read as much as possible. The Post, the Times, Journal. The Economist, I highly recommend. If you don't read The Economist, you should. It's the best magazine in the world. The others are just nothing. And I think their political coverage, foreign policy coverage, even their American political coverage is pretty damn good. Read as much as you can. Follow people on Twitter that you respect, right? Go to certain websites that are good. Think tanks, some are better than others. What I worry about is some so-called expert that really hasn't been outside and gotten any fresh air, that, they go to, I've gone to Harvard, then I get my master's at SAIS, and then I'm PhD at Berkeley, and it's like, you look at their resume, well, have you ever been anywhere? Have you been in the military? You've been in the State Department? Have you worked for USAID? So you got to be careful, I think, even with some of these so-called experts, and they're all nice people, most of them, but I like people who've actually done something besides, I have a PhD. Well, nice, good for you, but, did you work for CARE? Did you work for Mercy Corps, right? Have you been on the ground actually doing something? Were you at the embassy in Ukraine? I mean, what did you see? Were you in the military? Were you in Iraq, Afghanistan? I mean, that's what you really want to kind of keep an eye on, is these experts. And frankly, I think we get people on maybe too often that it's just another person with an opinion and a PhD, and you really want someone that knows what the hell they're talking about.
Hi. Andy Picone with E&E News. I think the defense beat is incredibly important, but it's not something that has appealed to me personally as a beat or interest. But I'm just curious to hear from you about what really drew you to it in the first place, and what's made you stick with it so long. Whether it's a matter of trying to hold this institution accountable, whether it's just exciting. If you could talk about
Yeah, I think it's all of that. I mean, I used to cover politics, and then I left Washington to go to Annapolis to cover the Naval Academy, and I was a history major in college and graduate school, so I just like American history anyway, and the Naval Academy was fascinating, and there was some good investigative stories we did. They had a huge cheating scandal there that we covered, and then all this other trouble there. And I just really kind of got into the beat. And then we had our Pentagon guy went to South Africa, and the beat was open. I said, I'd like to cover the Pentagon. Initially very intimidating, but I was at the Pentagon on 9/11. I got there 10 minutes after it happened. And before then, it was all budget stories. It was okay, but it wasn't fascinating. When that plane hit the building, it's a new world. I mean, it's the most exciting and fascinating beat there is, I think, and it's been a roller coaster ride really since then. It's been absolutely fascinating and amazing. And again, I study history, and the fact that you're kind of in the middle of it is what makes all of this really fascinating. I'm talking to John McCain. I'm talking to this person. I'm going to Iraq. I'm going to Afghanistan, and someone else is paying for it, right? I mean, it's the best job in the world. My son was working for a local paper, Loudoun County, Virginia, and he's getting into it now too. And we kind of laughing because my wife and he always said, journalism, I'm going to do something else. And now he's like, actually, this is kind of fun, kind of like it. So he's going to get a master's at Maryland, and it's a fellowship, so he's going to be actually teaching some classes. So we give him a hard time about this all the time. But it's, there's no better job.
Alex with Newsweek again. I spent a very, very brief amount of time at the Pentagon, but during that time, I've noticed this kind of interesting dynamic where it seemed like if there were a lot of journalists that had been in the military, and it seemed like if you had been in the military, that would earn you a lot of bonus points. I mean, to what extent do you think that's true, and to what extent do you think that dynamic affects kind of younger Pentagon reporters?
I think, I don't think it really affects that much. I don't think people at the podium really care. We have had some military veterans over the years. We had like a Vietnam veteran here or there. I don't think it mattered. It may matter a little bit with some people, but generally no. I think what they really respect is when you go with them somewhere. So a lot of time in Iraq, Afghanistan, and we would always buy cigars at Dubai and put it in our expense account. This is on the record, right? We buy Cuban cigars, we buy dip for the soldiers and cigars for the officers, just to kind of break the ice. And I think they respect when you go over there and cover their people, and the families respect it as well. And then you have, again, more sources. This captain or this colonel, you turn around, it's like 2-star general, right? Or what was even better back then was you would talk to senior officers like General Milley, who was in Afghanistan at the time, or Mike Flynn, you may have heard of him. And what they would say to you is, if I go out there where you're going, it's almost like a papal visit, and they're going to tell me everything's great, everything's fine. If you go out there, you're not a military guy, but you know what looks right and doesn't look right, and come back when you're done, and I want to talk with you about what you saw. So is that the bazaar is open. You can say, well, I saw this, that. Well, let me ask you about what's the future? What are you going to do next month over here? And there's that give and take, which helps everyone.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a freelancer, so I work for lots of places. Thanks so much for doing this. I'd be curious, as someone who's been in this industry for so long, we're in a pretty unique time in the media business economically. There's so much layoffs and outlets, closing altogether, consolidating, but also the demand for high quality information is more important than ever. And those of us who do have jobs are being asked to do more and more for less and less. What's your perspective on sort of where the industry is at right now and where it's going to moving forward and how it's going to remain sustainable?
I think it's still going to atomize over the coming years. I mean, we've had a little trouble with cutbacks. Thankfully, there are really good websites now, ProPublica, some of these other places are really good places to work. But you're going to have to be really nimble. I mean, it's not like when I started, I worked at a suburban paper outside of Boston. There were papers all over the place, and you could kind of work your way up the ranks to the Daily Transcript, where I worked with 13,000 circulation, to the Patriot Ledger, which had 80,000, to the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald. Now they're cutting back. The Baltimore Sun, where I work, when I started, they had 11 foreign bureaus, all gone. And our top editor at the Sun, Bill Marimo is his name, he was complaining to the publisher, you guys are cutting too much here. She said, really? You're fired on the spot, right? So NPR picks him up. And a few people went over from the Baltimore Sun to NPR, and then I was talking to one of them. I was like, well, how do you like radio? It's weird, isn't it? She said, no, it's great. You have to come over. The place is awesome. They have a lot of money, not like the Sun where they're cutting back. They send people everywhere. You definitely have to talk to Bill because, he went over, And I said, well, tell Bill I'll give him a call. And she calls the next day. She said, Bill says come in tomorrow. So I walk in his office, and I said, Bill, what's going on? He said, you're a finalist for the Pentagon job. I said, Bill, I'm a print guy. I don't do broadcasts. I don't know how to do that stuff. He said, they'll teach you how to do it. Don't worry about it. But a lot of this is luck, being nimble. Am I at a place where I can stay for 5 years, 10 years, maybe forever? I mean, we're lucky because we're working. It's a pretty good place to work. I mean, newspapers, they would have cut a lot more than 10%, believe me. So you have to figure out, where am I? How long do I stay at this place? If I'm at the Richmond, Virginia paper, which is, a pretty good paper, the chances of me making a career there are probably pretty slim. So you want to, as soon as possible, get to a good-sized organization where there's a lot of movement within our organization. You might be able to go overseas, work in the Washington Bureau, but you always, even more so today, you have to keep an eye on where things are going. I mean, AP, they're not going to go belly up, right? But they may have cutbacks, or other places, I'm told, are restricting travel and so forth. So as soon as you can, find a place that's good, large enough that you can stay for a while, but always be looking around, always. That help? But it's tough. I mean, it's, look around. I mean, it's a hard time.
This is sort of piggyback off of that question. I think it applies to people, so I'm trying not to just make it about a very self-serving question, but I cover sort of politics, national politics, breaking news, so it's like very general. And I guess to sort of continue to grow and like become a beat reporter, like how would you like kind of balance the time when it's like, I feel like for 9 hours a day, I'm heads down watching Biden, watching Trump, watching developments on the Hill, but obviously like 5 years from now, what companies need and organizations want are people who are experts. So like, I guess kind of to your point of like juggling all the different requests at NPR, like kind of how do you start sourcing up when you are kind of a generalist, but you don't want to be one forever?
Yeah, so what do you do now? You do like breaking news, like
Yeah.
a couple of paragraphs or something?
Yeah,
or something?
and like I do some reporting, but like the kind of bulk of my week will be like, it's like usually like reaching out to people to confirm things.
Got it. And who do you work for?
Axios.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Well, it's a pretty good-sized organization, isn't it, Axios?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what are you interested in? That'd be one thing. I mean, do you like healthcare? Do you like Pentagon? Do you like, farm issues? I mean, you've had to figure out what you like. And then I would just go to your bosses and say, hey, can I do a story on X, Y, and Z, right? Mm-hmm. Even if you have to do it on your own time, that's what I would do. And just try to work your way within the system. But a lot of this is, what are you interested in? If somebody told me to cover, business, I'm just not interested in business. I really don't care. I don't care about the jobs report, and I don't care about this other stuff. Science stuff I'm not really interested in. I did like politics for a while, but politics is sort of like, push a button, right? I know what these people are going to say. And the Pentagon is just, they're always doing something, right? Going to war, buying some stuff, right? Helping someone else go to war. I mean, it's fascinating. So you have to ask yourself, what do I really want to do? What do I like? And then go from there. And then just see if they'll break you off to do something, right? I mean, your boss is good with that? Or, I mean, some bosses are like, no, just put your head down and do the 9 hours, right? But, and that's an art in itself, talking with your bosses about this is where I want to go, this is what I want to do. But you have to figure it out for yourself first before you can kind of break away. But I would hit up your bosses and say, I like what I do, I love this place, but I want to do some other things. How do we make that happen? And I think usually, hopefully, a lot of bosses will say, yeah, we'll make it happen.
Tom, it's on a great point in finding what you love to do. And then also, I think there is a tendency, especially now in the business, that editors won't say no to a story, especially one that is compelling. And if you're able to find something that you want to do and find a compelling angle to that interest, I think it's hard for editors to turn something like that down, especially if you've already kind of reported it out.
Hi. I think it's on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Diego with Bloomberg, and actually staying on the topic and on a similar question, I'm also a big Economist reader, and
it's the best.
Yeah, I actually have the magazine in my back right now, but I really like international issues, and that my career goal is to eventually go abroad and cover international issues, but I'm not so big on the defense aspect and the kind of national security and arms sales and stuff like that. If you could talk a little bit about those differences and covering those different types of issues, more diplomacy, I would say, rather than just like attacks here, attacks there.
Yeah, well, I think it depends, I think, what country you want to go to, where they send you. I mean, some countries, I don't know, South America, there's less defense issues. It's more cultural issues. It could be, people are leaving and trying to cross the border into the United States. It could be all these different kinds of issues, trade issues, depending on what country you are. Now, if you're going to, be in Israel, I mean, clearly defense is going to be a huge part of that, particularly now. But other countries, yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of great stories everywhere. Cultural stories, business stories. And again, it gets back to, what do you like to do? What do you want to do? But there are clearly some countries where defense, weapons sales is going to be a huge part of the beat, right? But that doesn't mean you have to do them all the time. I mean, there are great stories everywhere you go, depending on what your boss wants and what you like to do.
Just a quick follow-up. Did you work internationally?
No. And I kind of like what I've been doing over the past number of years. You go to a place for a while. We go to like Iraq, Afghanistan for a month and then come home. I kind of like that stuff. And I had young kids at the time, and it's hard. If you're going to be a foreign correspondent, you're always working. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to have a family? Do I want to have kids? I mean, there are all those questions. I mean, you can do both, but it's very time-consuming working overseas. Very time-consuming, depending what country you're in. But our guy in Israel now, Daniel Estrin, I mean, he's, for the past 6 months, I mean, that guy's been working 24/7. It's not going to end anytime soon, And then we have our correspondent in Russia. He has all these other worries. What can I say? What can I report? Who can I talk with? Are they going to throw me out, throw me in jail, right? You got to be careful of all that stuff, too, when you're overseas. But and I think depending who you work for, I mean, with the Baltimore Sun, it was pretty, it was a good gig getting an overseas assignment, because it wasn't the New York Times, frankly, where you're running all the time. You're doing stories, help with this, you know, because it's the paper of record. But with a smaller paper, you're an overseas gig, you're in France or something, or, I mean, that's pretty damn good. You know, where they're not running you like a dog every day. That's pretty good.
Hi, I'm Sarah Fortinsky with The Hill. One of the biggest challenges, it seems to me, in covering defense policy is that, you know, as a civilian, as a reporter, you don't have as much information, or I guess you don't have as much experience. You don't necessarily have the intel that someone who's, you know, in the military and someone who has titles before their name, and it's very impressive, and they have that sort of edge. And how do you go about pushing back on things that are, how can you detect, like, how do you get the information in order to be able to push back on things that might just sound like, you know, talking points? And how do you know if, we talked a little bit this morning about what would happen if they ask you to hold a story for security concerns? How do you approach a situation like that with maybe less, you know, classified information than they have?
I mean, it's rare that they would ask you to hold something, and I don't think we would. The only time I could recall of actually not reporting on something when it was operational information. The U.S. military is going to do attack. Actually, we were in Afghanistan. They actually were going to do this military operation in a few weeks, and I knew the person quite well. So we're not going to report that. We're not going to say we're going here on this date because, you know, Taliban or Al Qaeda is going to be there. So, you know, something like that you wouldn't reveal. But you know, the other stuff, a lot of it's sometimes common sense, you know. Or you just do a lot of reading or understanding the situation. You know, one of the big things now is, okay, you need this big military. You spend $800 billion in a military. Why are you building an aircraft carrier? Why are you building another aircraft carrier? The Chinese can hit it, you know, 500-600 miles away. This is in 1942. Why do you need that? So if you're talking to the Navy, you know, you say that to them. Or better yet, if you're talking to the Army will basically be saying that. Right? Because it's, you know, this competition for money. But they would raise good questions. You know, they may say, I was at a hearing or I was at a meeting and with the Navy, and the Navy wants another aircraft carrier, they want this thing, and we're saying to them, they're going to blow it out of the water. Why do we need that? We need longer range missiles, you need drones. So a lot of this is actually, you know, in some ways common sense if you think about it, right? Why are you building so many manned aircraft when drones are the future? How do you balance between manned aircraft and drones or undersea drones, right? A lot of this is if you're just well read and you're asked normal questions, you know, I mean, that's how you do it. And the Navy may push back and say, no, I think that's wrong. But this is why you can almost play one off against another, right? Because the Army, they've been saying that for years. Why are you building a carrier, right? Or the Army may say, as they used to say in the past, why do we have a Marine Corps? Why do we have a little Army? We're the Army, right? So I hope that helps. I mean,
Yeah, no, very
yeah.
interesting. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more.
Thank you, Kwesi again. What has it been like covering the head of the agency being ill? Because it's a little bit more sensitive than what it would be like covering like budgets or something.
I'm sorry,
what has it been like covering the head of the agency being ill?
oh, you mean like Lloyd Austin?
Yeah.
Well, the big issue there was they didn't tell anyone. I mean, that was the story, not the medical issue at hand. And I think a lot of us kind of figured out what it was. If you're someone that age, it's likely X, Y, and Z. It's that kind of thing. So I think we kind of figured it out. But the big story was he goes to the hospital and they didn't tell the White House. And they didn't tell his deputy who was on vacation. And then they went in again and kind of did it all over again. He's a very secretive guy. He was this way in uniform, didn't like to talk to the press. I mean, that was just unbelievably bad. I mean, you always tell the White House. And it really, I think, fell to his chief of staff, who should have been alerted immediately to tell the White House. This is the Secretary of Defense. This isn't, you know, some minor official in the bowels of a bureaucracy. This is the Secretary of Defense. So that was the issue. It wasn't the medical issue. It was really, why didn't you tell anyone? It was a big story for a few weeks, and you know, I mean, you just cover it like anything else. I mean, you know, if they don't want to talk about what the medical issue is, that's one thing, but you have to alert people. That was really the big part of the story.
Okay. Well, I hate to shut it down, but I think Tom has to get back on the phone. Check with that guy again. And for his sake, and for, I guess, the world's sake, we hope that nothing happens with Iran. But I do want to thank Tom for spending the time and sharing with us just an incredible journey that he's had at the Pentagon. So join me in thanking him.